I used to believe a marriage breaks with a bang, a slammed door, a suitcase zipping shut, a car disappearing into the dark. But my marriage to Rafi didn't break that way. It developed hairline cracks, so fine you could pretend they were shadows cast by a kind light. "Your coffee," he'd say every morning, handing me the blue mug with a tiny chip on the handle because he knew I hated that chip and loved what it meant, that something flawed could still be chosen. His fingers would brush mine for a second longer than needed. I'd smile. We were okay, but then small things began to misalign. The blue mug was replaced by a travel tumbler. He left before I woke. He started running in the evenings even though he hated the sound of his breath when he ran. He started wearing cologne he hadn't worn in years. He started looking at his phone like people do when they're holding onto a lifeline or hiding a trap door. We'd planned a garden in the back of the duplex, a stubborn rectangle where no rose ever took. We laughed and said that was our omen. Some things must be coaxed again and again until they bloom out of sheer defiance. Rafi drew a grid. I bought seeds, but on planting day, rain came and he never came back from just a quick errand. I planted alone, dirt under my nails, thunder muttering like a disappointed father. That night my mother called. "Neela, I made halim. Too much, want some?" "Always," I said. My mother's voice was a threaded needle. When the seams of my life started to slip, she stitched quietly, invisibly. She arrived in a shawl that smelled like cardamom and sleep. She moved through our kitchen like it belonged to her. She hummed a tune from 1999 and asked about my garden and my health and whether our landlord finally fixed the leaky bathroom fan. She didn't ask about Rafi. I didn't tell her anything. After she left, I ate alone at the counter, the spoon warm in my palm, and replayed the day. When Rafi came home, he kissed my head and apologized, and I accepted without truly hearing him, because forgiveness had become our version of muscle memory. Weeks later, hairline cracks became fractures. A receipt in Rafi's jacket for a boutique hotel in the old part of town, the one with the iron balconies and the sugar glass chandeliers. A pale hair on the passenger seat of his car, not mine. The blue mug tucked behind the sugar canister, as if someone else had used it and hid it badly. I told myself stories to survive. He's planning something for our anniversary. He's meeting a client who needs confidentiality. He's not the kind of man who would do this to me. One night the rain came again, soft and compromising. I lay in bed scrolling through a feed of other people's curated happiness, and the fear that had been whispering for weeks finally learned to speak. At 1:13 a.m., I heard the soft click of the back door. Then a laugh, low, careful, complicit. My blood moved backward. I got up. I didn't turn on the light. I walked down the hallway and stood in the kitchen doorway. The back door was a blacker rectangle in the dark. Shadows shifted. A hand, Rafi's, touched someone's shoulder. The someone wore a shawl that looked too familiar. "Shh," the someone whispered. My mother's voice, unmistakable, as the door slipped closed behind them. Morning hollowed me out. I moved through the day like furniture being rearranged in a room I no longer recognized. Every object asked a question. The shawl? Coincidence. The laugh? Memory playing tricks. The timing? A paradox the mind creates when it's protecting you from something unlivable. I went to my mother's apartment with a brown bag of mangoes and a story I didn't believe, rehearsed so well it almost sounded like truth. I was awake late. I thought I heard you outside our back door. Isn't that funny? My mother, Salma, took the mangoes and washed them as if they were newborns. Why would I be at your back door at that hour? She said lightly. If I was, it would only be to tell you to sleep. You never sleep enough. She slid a mango into my palm, golden flesh, the shape of a borrowed heart. Her eyes were tired in the corners, the way eyes get when secrets are heavy and age is only a portion of the weight. She changed the subject. She asked about work, about my manager's impossible deadlines, about the garden that wouldn't bloom. She asked everything except the thing. That was our contract. The thing would remain unnamed until silence strangled it into confession. Back home, Rafi cooked dinner with performative gusto. Onion, ginger, garlic, the holy trinity of apologies. He told me a story about a client who'd finally signed, about a coworker who got engaged, about a podcast that said couples who laugh together outlast storms. He was careful with his phone, angling its screen down with the delicate ease of someone lowering a sleeping child into a crib. I had a strange dream, I said. Tasting my words like poison I needed to prove was poison. I think I saw my mother last night. He smiled with his mouth, not his eyes. You have strange dreams. I set my fork down. Rafi, is there something going on I should know? The air changed. He wiped his hands on a towel. He leaned against the counter, picking his next sentence as if it were a door that might stick. Work is stressful, he said. I didn't want to load you with it. I've been going on late runs to clear my head. Sometimes I walk behind the houses to avoid traffic. Maybe that's what you heard. Maybe, I said, and watched the lie plant itself like a seed we'd both pretend to forget. That night I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen and stood where I had stood before, watching the back door's outline pulse with the street light. How do you measure the distance between two people who are still sleeping in the same bed? Is it the width of the mattress or the length of a lifetime? At 12:40, I heard feet in the alley. At 12:41, a brief knock. 2 short, 1 long. I froze. I opened the door. No one. The alley smelled like rain and broken promises. On the step, a paper sack. Lemons, ginger, honey, cinnamon sticks. A note tucked between the lemons. For your throat. Boil gently. Sleep. I folded the note into a hard square and slid it into the pocket of my robe. I shut the door like a person closing a book before the worst chapter. The next day, I boiled the mixture because this is what people do. Cling to small acts of care floating above deeper waters. The steam smelled like my childhood kitchen. My mother called late afternoon. You sound better, she said. Did you rest? I stared at the kettle. I did. I lied back at her, and the lemon bloomed in the pot like a soft amber confession. I began to notice more. A new shirt in Rafi's closet that I didn't buy. A delicate, expensive brand of tea I'd only ever seen in my mother's cupboard on our shelf. A smudge of lipstick on a paper towel that wasn't my shade. The kind of clues you accuse movies of being too obvious for, until life shows you it is worse. It wants you to know and not know. Both, until you're fluent in the language of denial. One evening, my mother texted, "Come for dinner tomorrow. I made that eggplant you love." I wanted to say no and yes, to ask and to pretend, to cancel the world and make a new one where none of this was happening. We ate at her small table, the one that rocked slightly on the uneven tile. Raffi joined us, arriving late, offering a flask of something expensive, kissing my mother's cheek with a familial ease that turned my stomach. She served us like before, clucking at Raffi for being too thin, at me for working too much. She told a story about a neighbor who'd fallen in love with a pigeon that kept visiting his balcony, and how love finds a way, even in cities that forget sky. Raffi laughed. I did not. After dinner, she insisted on packing leftovers. In the kitchen, I saw it. The same expensive tea. The same brand. I ran my fingers over the box like a detective touching a murder weapon that looked like a gift. My mother caught me staring. "Bring it home," she said. "It helps you sleep, does it?" I asked. "Most nights," she said, and for a second, one dangerous, tender second, I thought she might tell me everything. But then she held my gaze like a teacher asking a last, easier question. "You are okay?" "I am okay," I heard myself say. "You can live in the same house as the truth and pretend it's a stranger. But the truth is nosy. It borrows your sugar and uses your bathroom and leaves the seat up." I started walking in the evenings. 2, past our alley, through streets where light pooled in doorways, to the boutique hotel with iron balconies. I stood across the street and watched couples arrive. Lipstick slanted in taxis, laughter folded into expensive coats. I told myself I was there for the architecture. I counted windows. I tried not to count hours. I booked a therapy appointment with a counselor named Farzana, who insisted I start sentences with "I feel" and mean it. "I feel betrayed," I finally said. "I feel like I'm standing in my own kitchen watching my husband touch my mother in the dark." Farzana didn't flinch. "What else do you feel?" "Like a person who has stumbled into a mirror maze. Mirrors still show you." She leaned forward. "What do you want to do?" I wanted to run. I wanted to set a trap. I wanted to forgive so completely that forgiveness would be my punishment and my freedom. Instead, I did something small. I changed where I kept the blue mug. One afternoon, I left it deliberately on the counter, a talisman and a test. When I returned from work, it was gone. I found it in the sink, rinsed, a lipstick crescent at the rim. Not mine. The shade was my mother's. Warm plum. The color of queens who didn't need crowns. That night, I asked Raffi to tell me his first memory of me. He paused, then said, "You were standing in a thrift store holding up a green dress like you weren't sure you were allowed to want anything." "Why did you fall in love with me?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "Because you ask questions like that." The next day, I took a half day from work and went to my mother's apartment without telling her. The building smelled like boiled rice and old conversations. I knocked, no answer. I used the key she'd given me for emergencies, and told myself that sometimes the emergency is not a fire but the smoke. Her place was immaculate in the way of women who have been told their entire lives that a clean floor is a kind of armor. I moved slowly through the rooms. On her vanity, the plum lipstick. In the living room, a photo of me at 12 with braces, next to a photo of Rafi and me at our wedding, and between them a small framed picture I had never seen. Rafi sitting at my mother's table, laughing at something out of frame, his hand resting near a bowl of cut mangoes. In the kitchen, another note tucked beside the tea. Don't forget to drink water today. R. I stared at the dash and the initial until it became a seam in the world. I left the apartment and stood in the hallway where the light flickered like an indecisive heart. I texted Rafi, "Where are you?" "At work. Why?" Came back instantly, just asking. I turned and nearly collided with Mrs. Banerjee from down the hall, who had lived in the building since television had 4 channels. "Neela," she said, clutching her cloth bag to her chest, "your mother told me you might come by. Take these sweet limes from my nephew. She knew I would come." My voice staged a smile it didn't feel. Mrs. Banerjee tilted her head. "You daughters circle your mothers like birds. You always return when it rains." After she disappeared into her door, I went back into my mother's apartment and sat at the rocking table. I put my phone on record and set it face down. I felt monstrous, spying on a woman who had once walked through a fevered night holding me to her chest so I could breathe. But love teaches strange languages. The door opened 20 minutes later. I recognized the footsteps, my mother's soft drag, a second pair careful and precise. Rafi's. They spoke in half whispers, the kind that are more intimacy than speech. "Only a few minutes," my mother said. "She could come back." "I know," Rafi said. I needed to see you." My mouth filled with metal. They moved to the kitchen. A glass clicked. Water ran. My mother's laugh, low, careful. "You'll ruin us both," she said, and there was a thrill in it I had never heard from her in relation to anything but music from her college days. I listened to the recording like a person swimming past ropes, waiting for the knotted, inescapable snare. The words were there, not quite confession, but its shadow. Ruin, see you, only a few minutes. And beneath that, a texture that felt like mercy, reaching for malice and not caring which it grasped. They left. I played the recording again until the battery died, and then I sat in the half-dark and let the silence say what the words hadn't. I replaced the key under the doormat. I walked home into a sky that had run out of colors. That night, Rafi came in with the smell of cool air and apology. "You're pale," he said, touching my cheek. "Are you sick?" "Yes," I said, and could not tell if it was a lie. He made me tea. I held the mug, not the blue one, an unfamiliar white one from the back of the cupboard. He watched me drink. I watched him pretend. "Do you still love me?" I asked finally. He closed his eyes like a child about to jump into water. "Yes," he said, "in a way I don't know how to stop." "Then stop whatever you're doing," I said. and for a moment something in his face cracked. A revelation or a resolve. I couldn't tell. I can't. He whispered so quietly, I could pretend I hadn't heard. The day the garden finally bloomed, I was at my mother's apartment, waiting to set the world on fire. I invited them both to dinner, a celebration, I said over text. I got the promotion. I had not. But lies like spices can be justified if they make a hard truth edible. I cooked extravagantly. I set the table with the wedding plates we rarely used. I placed the blue mug at the center like a talisman or a threat. I printed a transcript of the recorded conversation and placed it in a plain envelope, heavy with intent. Raffi arrived first with flowers so luminous the room looked lit from the inside. He kissed my cheek, lips grazing skin like someone asking permission they already intended to ignore. My mother arrived second, shawl draped like a royal pronouncement, eyes already scanning for exits. We toasted. We laughed. We told stories about the year that made us, and the years that unmade us. We ate too quickly the way people do when they are stalling the conversation that must follow dessert. I stood and cleared the plates. I have a game, I said, returning with the envelope like a magician. A game? My mother asked, suspicious but curious, like a cat considering a box. Let's each put one secret on the table, just one, to keep us honest. I smiled the way interviewers do when they are about to ask the question that matters most. Raffi's fork paused midair. My mother's fingers tightened on her napkin. I slid the envelope toward them. I'll start, I said. I recorded a conversation at your apartment, Ma. I heard enough to know the shape of the secret even if I couldn't see its face. The room stilled. You never know how many clocks are in a room until they stop together. Raffi swallowed. Neela. My mother exhaled in a sound too soft to be a word. I need you both to tell me the truth, I said. Now. Not the kind you serve with dinner and call it love. Raffi looked at my mother. An entire conversation passed between them in the space of that look. Fear, tenderness, guilt, defiance. He nodded once and turned to me. It started because I couldn't talk to you, he said, and the sentence carried all the sins of people who mistake confession for contrition. I was lost. Your mother, Salma, she saw me, she reminded me of you and not of you. The parts of you I missed. Stop, I said. Stop telling me a love story when I asked for a fact. He lowered his eyes. We met sometimes. We talked. It was not what you think. Not exactly. I never meant to what? I asked. To choose yourself? To choose her? To choose a version of me that didn't argue about finances and fall asleep on the couch with spreadsheets on her chest? My mother spoke finally, and her voice made a sound like a torn curtain. Punish me, not him, she said. I am the adult who should have known better. I was lonely, Neela. Not for romance, for being essential to someone again. You grew, you left. That is the job description for a mother. To make yourself unnecessary and pretend you don't miss it. She looked at Raffi, then back at me. He came to drop off groceries. He stayed to talk about you. It felt... She paused, frowning at the word. It felt like holding a photograph of you at 17 and knowing what to say to make you eat. I mistook that feeling for something else. I didn't sleep with your husband. But I betrayed you, in thought, in attention, in little midnights. My body didn't know which betrayal to prioritize. The room spun slightly, like a carousel of bad options. I picked up the blue mug and set it in front of my mother. Whose lipstick? She smiled, the saddest thing I have ever seen. Mine, she said. From 20 years of drinking while daydreaming about your future, I turned to Rafi. The boutique hotel? He winced. I booked it twice. I couldn't go through with it. I canceled at the front desk, sat in my car, and felt like someone had died, and I was both the killed and the killer. The receipts you found were the false starts. That doesn't make me better. It makes me a coward in installments. Silence inflated. Silence popped. I heard a car outside, a neighbor laughing, a child announcing a victory in a game with no rules. Why didn't you come to me? I asked both of them. I am right here. I was always right here. Rafi cried then. A quiet, unhandsome crying that made me want to wipe his face and also leave the city forever. Because I didn't know how to be seen by you without proving I deserved it, he said. Your standards were my compass. I lost mine. My mother pressed her napkin to her mouth. Because I have spent my life telling you to be strong, and I couldn't bear to show you my weakness and what it had chosen. I stood. The chair scraped back like a reprimand. I need air. On the porch, the garden had finally obeyed. Tiny, stubborn blooms pushed through the soil, a confetti of color against a world I no longer recognized. I breathed until breathing turned back into something that belonged to me. Rafi stepped outside. He didn't touch me. He stood beside me like a person waiting for a bus he might not board. What do we do? He asked. I looked at the flowers. We don't pretend they grew without weather, I said. We decide if we can stand the storms we invited. Behind us, my mother's silhouette appeared in the doorway. She spoke softly. I will disappear if that's what you need. You don't get to vanish to make this easier on your conscience, I said. You stay, and you hold the weight with us. She nodded, tears tracking into the soft places time had carved. And then a small, domestic mercy. The kettle inside boiled itself into a shout. My mother went in to quiet it. Rafi stayed, hands empty. Do you want me to leave? He asked. Yes, I said. For now. He nodded and left. I watched him go and felt both emptied and filled with something I didn't yet have a name for. After is the part no one teaches you. There are support groups for grief, for addiction, for anger. There is no weekly circle where people say, Hi, I'm Neela, and my mother almost had an affair with my husband because we all mistook tenderness for a ladder out of loneliness. I moved into my mother's apartment for a while, not as punishment, but as quarantine. We rearranged her living room, not because it needed it, but because moving furniture feels like progress when nothing else does. We cooked together and spoke carefully, like people walking across a frozen pond listening for cracks. She apologized often, but not performatively. I accepted often, but not generously. We learned new pronouns for each other. Not my mother and my daughter, but Salma and Neela. Two women in a small kitchen making tea and talking about weather systems inside their chests. Rafi texted most mornings. Thinking of you. Therapy at 4. I left the rent check under the plant. I fixed the bathroom fan. Practical penance. Sometimes he sent a photo from his runs. The river arrogant with light at sunset. The hotel's iron balconies casting shadows like prison bars. The alley where the lemons once waited. Farzana asked in session, "What do you want to build now?" "Not a return to before," I said. "Before is what made after possible. So?" "A life where care is not a secret." Rafi asked for a meeting. I said yes. We chose a public bench at the park. The kind of place where people are too busy pressing joy into weekends to notice the quiet negotiations of strangers. He looked thinner. Not tragic, just emptied of unexamined ease. "I told my parents," he said without preamble. "Not the specifics. Enough. My mother told me to beg. My father told me to grow up. I think they're both right." "I told no one," I said, "except my therapist, and the woman who sells me coriander, by accident, because I started crying over herbs." He smiled, brief and honest. We sat in the kind of silence that is not a test but a rest. "Do you want this marriage?" I asked finally. "Yes," he said, "but not if it ruins you." "It won't ruin me," I said. "People ruin themselves by refusing to look at what they've done." He nodded. "I ended everything with your mother, whatever you'd call it." I blocked numbers. I deleted threads. I wrote an apology letter I won't send. "Good," I said, and meant it, even as a part of me mourned the version of our family dinners that will never return. We decided on rules, not punitive, not performative. Simple, stubborn things. No secrets walked around after midnight. No gifts that don't have all 3 names on the card. If loneliness shows up, it knocks on my door first. At my mother's apartment, we agreed on other rules. If Rafi needed to drop off groceries while I was away, he left them with Mrs. Banerjee because that woman is an entire moral code disguised as a cardigan. If my mother missed something about our old intimacy, the kind that's half caretaking, half control, she told me instead of inventing a crisis to be essential for. The garden, once negligent, began to riot. Flowers argued their way into the world. One afternoon, Rafi came by to fix the loose step and stayed to pull weeds. My mother brought lemonade and said, "I can go inside," and I said, "No, stay." And none of us pretended it wasn't an act of courage to exist on the same patch of sun. Months blurred into a season. We held a small gathering, for no reason beyond surviving ourselves. I put the blue mug on the table with the other mismatched cups, demoting it from sacred object to ceramic thing that holds warm water. Rafi took tea in it without ceremony. My mother sipped from a glass like a person respecting boundaries in liquid form. Near the end of the evening, the sky went brief and gold, the way it does when it considers forgiving everyone. Rafi stood beside me on the porch. "Do you think we'll be okay?" He asked softly. "I think okay is something you do," I said. "Not something you are." He nodded. "I wrote something," he added, embarrassed. "A letter I did send, to you, but I won't give it if you don't want it." "Give it," I said. He handed me the envelope. Inside a single page. Not apologies, those had already been spent, but a list. What I will practice when love feels difficult. 1. Tell you the hard thought before it becomes an action. 2. Choose transparency when secrecy feels easier. 3. Ask for company when loneliness knocks. 4. Remember that desire is weather and commitment is climate. 5. Love your mother as your mother, not as a mirror. I folded it back into the envelope and felt something inside me stand up. Not wholly healed, but taller. Later, I met Farzana and told her the truth I didn't know I'd been carrying. I believed an affair is always about sex, I said. But sometimes it's about attention, about being witnessed, about people confusing relief for love. And your mother? She asked. She's learning to be witnessed without stealing light, I said, and I'm learning to share mine without rationing. I went back to the garden at dusk. My mother was there, kneeling to deadhead spent blooms, the way you remove what no longer feeds to make room for what will. She looked up, and her face arranged itself into an old, familiar map, roads I knew, neighborhoods I avoided, lands we were still naming. I made lemon tea, she said, almost laughing at the full-circle joke of it. We'll drink it, I said, and then sleep. Together? She asked, then quickly corrected. In the same house. In the same house, I said, and we smiled at the ridiculousness of women who must clarify the ways they mean love now. That night, I placed the blue mug back behind the sugar canister. Not hidden, just resting where ordinary things rest. At 1:13 a.m., I lay awake out of habit. The house was quiet. No door clicked. No laugh invented a second meaning. Only wind and the occasional, tender sound of something settling deeper into where it belonged. I realized then what the title of our private tragedy had concealed. The affair nobody saw coming was not a headline in a scandal sheet. It was a forecast. We had ignored the weather reports, loneliness accumulating, visibility low, and then we drove anyway. Now we were learning to check the sky. In the morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and soil. Rafi was in the kitchen. My mother was on the porch. I poured 3 cups and carried them outside. To after, I said, handing them each a cup. To after, my mother echoed. Rafi took my hand. Not a claim. A question, I answered it by not letting go.